Hello, I'm Sophie Ikenya. Welcome to Focus on Africa, our top stories. Talking to the BBC, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa gives his reaction to US sanctions on the wealthy Gupta family who have links to former President Jacob Zuma.
We welcome the act that they have taken. The United States has a broad law and authority where the president is able to sanction.
The South African leader also gave his response to the fallout from the recent xenophobic violence, which left 12 people dead.
I was humble enough to say, yes, we apologize for what happened. And many people criticize me for apologizing.
Also in the program, from political outsider to president, mass celebrations as a former law professor Kais Saied scoops a landslide victory to become Tunisia's new leader. And in sports, Kenyans are still celebrating two major feats this weekend by two of their star athletes. Thanks for joining us on Focus on Africa from BBC World News. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has welcomed the move by the United States to impose sanctions against the Gupta family over alleged corruption in the country. Now, the Guptas are accused of using their friendship with the former leader Jacob Zuma to siphon off billions of dollars in state-owned enterprises. President Ramaphosa is visiting London, and I asked him, having served as Mr. Zuma's deputy, did he absolutely have no idea that the alleged deals were going on?
Well, that is actually not really the issue.
What is the issue, Mr. President?
The actual issue is that now that these things have been revealed, what are we doing about them? The first step has been to say these things have happened in the past. We've instituted a commission. The commission is unraveling all this. The evidence is being gathered, and prosecutions are definitely going to happen.
And that is the question. People are asking, we haven't seen any head roll at all.
Yes, what we have done...
We're just hearing people speak, people talk, people...
That is true. Obviously, people want things to happen yesterday. But we live in a country that is governed by the rule of law. We have to do things in terms of law, in terms of the regulations, and in terms of delineating tasks to certain institutions. Now, the President of South Africa does not arrest people, he does not charge people, and he does not sentence people to jail.
All right, so let's talk about the institutions then. The United States of America has now sanctioned the Gupta family.
Indeed.
And they have done that, calling them a significant corruption network in South Africa.
Yes, indeed.
But your political opponents, especially the Democratic Alliance, has accused you of failing to act against us. This is what they're saying, I'm quoting them.
Indeed.
Failing to act against a single individual that has been implicated in state capture. They said, Mr. Ramaphosa, this single act by the United States government has done more in the fight against state capture than you and your administration have done to undo and act against this mass form of unabated corruption. Why is the United States doing something that you as South Africans should be doing? Are they doing your job?
No, they're not. The United States is not doing our job, but we welcome the act that they have taken. The United States has a broad law and authority where the president is able to sanction not only individuals and countries. We don't have such a law. So they have, and they've used that instrument against whomsoever around the world without even putting people on trial. We work in terms of our laws, and our laws dictate that anybody who is accused of a crime must be charged, they must be brought before a tribunal or a court of law. They have the right to defend themselves. They have the right to answer to any charges that are preferred against them, and thereafter a judge may find them guilty or not. So everybody in South Africa is presumed innocent until proved otherwise, guilty or otherwise. Now, and I've been saying to the nation let's have the patience and let's give those people who we have given the task to do this work, to do their work, because they will do their work without any fear, without any prejudice, and they must be able to conduct their work.
Your predecessor, Jacob Zuma, tried to unsuccessfully block a corruption case against him. First of all, are you surprised that he's before the courts?
Well, this has been a matter that's been going on for the past 14 years or so. And former President Zuma, as a citizen of our country, has had all the rights to defend himself. And that's precisely what he has done, and utilized every legal instrument that he has. And that is what is embedded in our legal system, and it is embedded in our constitution. And I'd like people to understand that we are a country that is governed by the rule of law.
Well, in a moment, we'll be hearing more from that interview. But I'm fast joined by the BBC's Milton Nkosi in Johannesburg. Milton, President Ramaphosa has welcomed those U.S. sanctions against the Guptas. But how satisfied are people there in South Africa with the speed with which the inquiry into the state capture is moving?
People are impatient, Sophie. They want to see action. They want some big figures who've been fingered in corruption contracts behind bars. But as President Ramaphosa has just explained there to you, I've been covering him since the early 90s when he was still negotiating the end of apartheid. He is known to be a man of process. He does indeed believe in strengthening institutions. So he was telling you the truth there. And he believes that it takes time to get to a point where things will start to happen. But he's confident that once we get there, people will start to see the dominoes falling.
And briefly, Milton, the country must be keenly awaiting tomorrow's trial, in a separate case, corruption trial of former President Zuma.
Oh, yes, indeed. President Zuma is expected to be in court tomorrow to defend himself against the arms deal of the early 90s. People are waiting for him. But there are other stories that have taken over South Africa's headlines, Sophie.
All right. Stay with us, Milton, because I did speak to President Ramaphosa on another issue that got some grave reaction, really, from Africa. That's a xenophobic violence in September against foreign-owned businesses. I asked him how damaging it was for South Africa.
It's been damaging. We must accept that, and that is why as soon as those attacks had happened, by the way, let's remember that there were almost 12 people who died. 10 of them were South Africans and 2 were from Zimbabwe. And that led to the displacement of a number of people, both South Africans as well as foreign nationals. As soon as they happened, I decided to dispatch envoys to various countries on the African continent to go and carry a message that says that South Africans are not xenophobic. South Africans do not hate other foreign nationals.
Mr. President, are you not being a bit disingenuous here? Because you saw South Africa hit the headlines because of violent attacks on foreign-owned businesses, despite the fact that 10 of the people who were killed were South Africans. How are you specifically going to reconcile the expectations of South Africa? You're supposed to be chairing the AU. How are you going to reconcile those expectations next year with that damage that xenophobia has had on South Africa?
Fortunately, many of the African leaders and many of the African people have internalized what has happened in South Africa.
You sent envoys to various countries, and a lot of people said, why, this is too little, too late. You waited, I think, more than 2 or so weeks before something concrete was done, after you'd gone to Zimbabwe for the state funeral, which, by the way, people saw you on stage and the reaction from the crowds, really. How do you feel as an African when you see your people acting against other Africans?
Well, it's not only a question of how do I feel. When something is wrong, that's done against anyone, including other Africans, it's something bad that I must condemn. I have to condemn it, and I have to call on any person who wants to perpetrate violence against anyone to desist from doing so and not to participate in acts like that. Criticize me for apologizing, and I say, as a leader responding to what the pain that fellow Africans were feeling, I had to do it right there on the spot, and I regret what has happened.
Well, Milton, listening to Mr. Ramaphosa there, it feels like he's on a desperate charm offensive across the continent.
Oh yes, indeed. He began that soon after the violence broke out by sending those envoys led by the former Minister Jeff Radebe. So he's very keen to get South Africa on its feet. In fact, most people now are beyond the xenophobic attack stories. They're trying to rebuild South Africa and rebuild those communities that were torn by violence. South Africans are now talking, Sophie, about the fact that the rugby team in South Africa, the Springboks, have reached the quarterfinals in Japan, and there are many other local stories that are now moving into the front pages as xenophobic attack story begins to move into the inside pages. But President Ramaphosa is definitely on a charm offensive.
All right, Milton Nkosi for us there in Johannesburg. Thank you. This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News. Still to come, he may have led his side to a 1-1 draw with Brazil at the weekend, but could Gernot Rohr's time as Nigeria's coach be coming to an end? Find out in sports. You're watching Focus on Africa on BBC World News. A political outsider has scooped a landslide victory in Tunisia to become the country's next president. As an independent candidate, Kais Saied, a former law professor, has vowed to address the country's economic and social problem. Now, a short time ago, the Electoral Commission made the announcement that he'd received 72.71% of the vote from Sunday's runoff election, which equates to 2.7 million people. His opponent, Nabil Karoui, trailed with just 27.29% of the vote. Well, the BBC's Rana Jawad is following all the developments for us and joins us live from the Tunisian capital, Tunis. Rana, talk us through the results so far.
Yes, well, as you mentioned there, the Electoral Commission held its first press conference since last night, really, to announce the preliminary results of the voting that took place. It reflected a similar result to the exit polls that were announced yesterday as well. Kais Saied winning a landslide victory, really, in this election. But the final result is expected on Friday. In that time, if there are any complaints about the electoral process, they can be lodged from now until then. But for now, this is where the Election Commission's job stops.
What can we expect from Mr. Saied as President, Rana?
Well, he is a political outsider, or rather anti-establishment, and a lot of people see him as the man of the law. I think for a lot of Tunisians, that they're expecting someone who will change the course of politics here. He has promised to decentralize the political system here. And of course, he's appealed a lot to the youth, so they're expecting reforms in the education sector, and also some kind of guidance in terms of an economic plan. He himself has said he doesn't really have a plan. It will be guided by the youth and the people, depending on what they want, and that he will strengthen the legal institutions and empower them to achieve whatever it is that they want. But let's hear from the man himself when he took to the streets yesterday.
We will raise all the challenges with our blood, sweat and will, especially economic and social ones, because the Tunisian people expect solutions in this aspect.
All right, so he's been looked at as a political outsider. He's a law professor. So what do we expect in the next coming days? And also, when do we expect the final results to be announced?
Well, the final results will be announced on Friday, but it can only change if there's any significant complaint about the electoral process. Some are still speculating over whether his opponent, Nabil Karoui, would lodge an appeal against the results. There is no indication of that at this time, although he threatened to before because he was incarcerated during much of the campaigning period of this election. But we'll have to wait and hear from his camp. He appeared, Mr. Nabil Karoui, the rival, appeared to concede earlier today by sending a congratulatory statement to Mr. Kais Saied on winning the presidency. But I suppose the next few days will tell us whether it will stay as such.
Indeed, Rana. And I just wonder what these elections mean to the region as a whole.
Well, for the region, it's yet another example of how it could be done, I suppose. Much of the region is still reeling from the aftermath of 2011, the revolution that started in this country, in Tunisia, and kick-started the Arab Spring. This is Tunisia's second free and fair, as far as we know, presidential election since 2014. It's been done peacefully. A lot of people here have a renewed energy, or rather a renewed energy was injected into this election, and they trust the process, if nothing else. So I think for everyone else in the region, they're still looking at Tunisia as that shining example, if you will.
All right, Rana Jawad for us there in Tunis. Thank you. Let's now take a quick look at other stories making headlines across Africa. The families of the 32 Kenyans who died in the Ethiopian Airlines crash in March have held a private memorial service following the return of their relatives' remains. The bodies were flown back to Nairobi earlier on Monday. Identification of the badly burnt remains was painstakingly completed through DNA matching. Peace talks between Sudan's transitional government and rebels are taking place in neighboring South Sudan. East African leaders have gathered in the capital, Juba, for the start of dialogue. The rebel groups who are not part of the power-sharing deal struck between the military and the civilian pro-democracy movement. You're watching BBC Focus on Africa. Let's find out what's happening in the world of sport. Peter.
You'll be very happy to hear this next story, Sophie, because the sporting world is still taking in two massive achievements this weekend. On Saturday, Eliud Kipchoge became the first athlete to run a marathon in under 2 hours, beating the mark by 20 seconds. And just a day later, Brigid Kosgei smashed the world marathon record on her way to winning the Chicago Marathon. Both, of course, are Kenyans, and as Celestine Karone reports from Nairobi, the feats created quite a buzz in the country.
Long-distance running globally after being at the center of two major milestones in distance running over the weekend. Olympic champion Eliud Kipchoge broke the 2-hour barrier in the 42-kilometer event in Vienna, Austria on Saturday, a result which was celebrated locally and beyond and has inspired many. But just over 24 hours after Eliud's impressive run, another Kenyan put her name in the history books. At the Chicago Marathon on Sunday, Brigid Kosgei clocked 2 hours, 14 minutes and 4 seconds to shatter Paula Radcliffe's 16-year-old marathon world record by 81 seconds. Now, as impressive as Eliud's run was, it will not be recognized as an official world record because of the controlled conditions in the race, but Brigid's will. Now, as Brigid awaits the IAAF to ratify the world record, it means that Kenyans now hold both records for the 21-kilometer and 42-kilometer events in the men and women categories.
What a great weekend for the sports. Football now, and Chad, the Gambia and South Sudan are all through to the group phase of the 2021 Africa Cup of Nations qualifying. Chad just edged Liberia 5-4 on penalties to make it through to Group A of qualifying. The Gambia also needed spot kicks to beat Djibouti and progress to Group D of qualifying. South Sudan beat the Seychelles 3-1 on aggregate to go through. Sao Tome are also through and will be in Group C of qualifying. The future of Gernot Rohr as Nigeria coach seems to be in doubt amid reports that the 66-year-old German is being owed his salary. Rohr has a contract until June 2022 and has had late salary payments since he took charge of the Super Eagles in August 2016. The Nigeria Football Federation admits that Rohr is owed September's salary and not 3 months, as widely reported. There is speculation that the Super Eagles' 1-1 draw against Brazil in Singapore on Sunday could be his last game in charge. And finally, Ivory Coast forward Gervinho has extended his contract with Italian Serie A side Parma for another season. The club confirmed that the new deal extends his stay with the side until June 2022. The 32-year-old former Arsenal player has been rewarded for his good performances since joining Parma in August 2018 from Chinese club Hebei China Fortune. He scored 11 goals in 30 league games for Parma last season. By the way, congratulations for the weekend's achievements.
I know. Thank you very much indeed, Peter.
I bet you feel they're yours, right?
Of course. Everyone's claiming the Kenyans now. Thanks for the support. Thank you. Now, on Tuesday, Mozambique goes to the polls in an election that many believe will test August's peace deal that was signed between the ruling Frelimo party and the opposition Renamo. Frelimo has been in power for 44 years, with much of that time marred by civil war, unrest, and an insurgency in the north. The BBC's Shingai Nyoka travelled to Ngorongosa, the region that saw some of the fiercest fighting.
For decades, these hills were home to Mozambique's resistance movement, Renamo. From here, they fought government forces. James remembers what that was like.
My family suffered a lot through the conflict. We went without food because we could not work the land out of fear. The fighting was not targeted. When the army and Renamo crossed paths, they would shoot randomly and the community would have to run and hide in the bush.
Mozambique's civil war lasted 17 years and claimed over 1 million lives. An uneasy peace was reached in 1992. Since then, the two major political parties have staggered from one ceasefire to another. Teachers abandoned their accommodation here many years ago, fearing for their lives. Now, the guns that caused them to flee have largely fallen silent, and the schools that closed have now been reopened. But there are some that still don't believe that peace is here to stay. In August, a new ceasefire was signed. Look at James's reaction when I ask if it will hold.
This is the third agreement. I don't feel this is definitive. If after 2 or 3 years the peace holds, then we can say that it will last.
The ruling Frelimo party has been in power for nearly half a century, and it doesn't expect that will change. But as part of the ceasefire, they did agree to the election of regional governors. That means that supporters of the opposition may have something to celebrate. They will govern the provinces they win. For their part, Renamo agreed to disarm, but the majority of their fighters remain in their bases, and their leader, Osufo Momade, faces challenges from within, with some refusing peace.
The point is, if people don't believe that, like peacefully they can make their voice heard. We have traditions of, using the guns to have your voice heard.
At stake is the future of a country which holds so much promise. But for James, it's about something more than just prosperity. These elections are about lasting peace. Shingai Nyoka, BBC News, Ngorongosa, Central Mozambique.
And don't forget, you can get in touch with me and some of the team on social media. I'm Asa Kenye. That's Focus for now. Thanks for your company.